introduce our opening plenary speaker for day 3, Katherine Bilsborough. Katherine has worked in ELT for more than 30 years. She writes monthly blog posts for the National Geographic In Focus blog and is author of How to Write Primary Materials, published by ELT Teacher2Writer. Katherine is a member of the IATEFL Materials Writers Special Interest Group Committee and is co-founder of ELT Footprint, which won this year's ELTons Award for Innovation in Teacher Resources. During Katherine's plenary, we recommend watching in speaker view, and if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. Now, without any further ado, over to you, Katherine. Please share your screen.
Okay, I hope I'm sharing my screen. Can somebody just mention in the chat that they can see my slides? And that you can hear me okay? Oh, good. I'm seeing some yeses. That's always a good sign. Thank you for the introduction, David. Thank you very much to the YLTSIG for inviting me to speak today. It's always an honour to attend an event by the YLTSIG, let alone take part in one as a speaker. So we're going to be here for an hour for my session, and I'm going to be speaking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions and answers. So don't be shy. Post your questions, as David said, in the questions box, and I'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. So this talk is called Lessons Learned While Developing Materials for Primary Learners of English. And David asked me to speak as a materials writer, as a young learners teacher, as a young learner teacher trainer, etc., all of those things combined. And I decided to talk about materials, but talking about lessons that I've learned throughout my career so far from the learners themselves. So I've been making materials for primary learners since I started teaching in 1987. So at that time, it was very much a case of felt pens, coloured pieces of card, cutting out, sticking, this kind of thing. We didn't have anywhere near the range of possibilities that teachers have today. And today, teachers have no need very often to create their own materials, but they are still doing it for one reason or another. So can I ask you to write in the chat box, do you ever make your own materials? Just write yes or no. Okay, this is what I predicted you'd reply, you'd respond, lots of yeses. I believe that all teachers use materials, or all teachers make materials for one reason or another. And also, as we're going to look at today, all learners engage with materials. So this is where I'm coming from. While I'm continuing, maybe you can write in the chat box, think about the last materials that you made for your learners. What were they? What did you make? So primary teachers in general, we make worksheets, we make games, we make flashcards, we make tests sometimes, posters, we make all kinds of resources. And these days with online possibilities, I'm sure that many of you make fantastic resources to use in your classroom in a virtual sense. So sometimes we do it because we enjoy it, but also it's an opportunity to be creative, and I think that's, for me, number one reason why I do it. But also another, also number one probably, we can tailor the materials that we make for our particular context, our unique context. And we'll be looking at that in a second. So I'm going to share with you 10 or 11 lessons that I've learned from my learners, okay, over the years. And some of them you might think, well, that's obvious. I mean, that's just common sense. And I think as most valuable information when it comes to teaching, when it comes to the theory, it's often good common sense. And if it isn't, I would question its value. So lesson number one, I would say any end product has to be either for the classroom, so something like a class poster or a display in the classroom or something, or for the individual learner. Now, why am I saying that? Well, as you know, those of you who teach primary, and the younger we go, the more clear this is, they are very, very self-centered. They want everything for themselves. It's all about me, me, me. Their world is still quite small. So if you put them into groups to make something, and then there's an end product at the end, what do you do with that product? Because I've been caught out. I mean, these lessons, some of them I learned the hard way by doing the wonderful thing in class. When you get a group of 2 or 3 children, they make something, and then they all want to take it home. So then you think, okay, maybe we can have a rota system. So this child can take it home to show his family on one day, bring it back, and this doesn't work. And anyone who's been in this situation will know that this doesn't work. Obviously, this doesn't mean that you have to do individual work all the time. And in fact, I'm a great believer in doing as much group work, pair work, whole class work as possible. But whenever you have one product at the end, make sure that there's either one each or there's just one and it stays in the classroom. And as I said, this is probably one of the most common sense lessons that I'm going to share today. But when I was a new teacher, this is a lesson that I learned the hard way. And obviously you learn it the hard way, you never make that mistake again, yeah, because it is so obvious. So lesson number 2, and this is another common sense, if you like. I like, we talk about the C words very often, don't we? Creativity, communication. Can you remind me of the others in the chat box? Those 21st century skills that we talk about for primary children. And for me, yeah, you put it collaboration, critical thinking, I think is one. For me, one of them that's very key and doesn't get used very often, but for me, it's number 1, is common sense. So always have a couple of spare copies, because what happens in the classroom when we give out worksheets or whatever, what happens is the children, some children know what to do with them, or they might not do anything immediately with them. But some children, and I'm thinking particularly of, I could give names, but I won't do that, of my own students over the years. And what they've done is they've written in the wrong place, they've accidentally destroyed them, they might have broken them on purpose if they're having a bad day or whatever. So, yeah, they mess things up sometimes. But one thing as well about this is don't get stressed when this happens, because don't take it out on the child, because they probably feel bad enough as it is. Just be very patient. And I think that's one attribute that all primary teachers should have and probably have, is patience, and just give them another copy. So yeah, and somebody's saying that they lose them. Anything can happen. Yeah, if you have 15 children in the class, and I know that some of you have a lot more than 15. How many children have you got in your classes? Type that into the chat box. I'd be interested in hearing. But if you've got 15 children, I would make maybe 18 copies, something like that. Okay, I'm looking at some big numbers there. That's some 80 plus from Nita. My goodness. Okay, so the lesson 3, and you know this as well. Every child is unique. Now, if you've been in a primary classroom, you know this, but I think that as human beings, we know this anyway, because we are unique as adults. So, of course, our children are unique. And what does this mean in terms of materials? Well, first of all, in Spanish, I live in Spain and I've lived here for quite a long time. And we have a saying in Spanish, which is, cada niño es un mundo. Each child is a world. And I love that saying because it means so much. So I'm going to ask you to write in the chat box as well. Have you got a similar saying in your country or in your place of origin or where you work, where you live? Something that says every child is a world or something like this. If you'd like to share that or the translation in English for us in the box, I think that's quite a nice way of looking at your class. So what does this mean? Well, for a start, it means that every child will respond differently to the materials that you give them. So over time, they'll develop preferences, and it's your job as a teacher to notice these preferences, and then you can take them into account when you're designing your materials. So I would say that always, when you are either using pre-published materials or when you're making materials yourself to use in class, I would always ask yourself before the lesson, as you're planning your lesson, how can I tweak this? What small change can I make to this in order to help Pablo, Anna, John? Yeah, because you'll know your children. So you'll know that some children will want more support, more scaffolding, some kind of help, extra models. The children might need a bit more of a challenge, okay? And if we create our own materials, then I would say always create at least 2 versions. If you have time, 3 versions. That doesn't imply doing lots of extra work. With a few tweaks here and there, you can include lots of opportunities for differentiation, which is what we're talking about now. Okay, so for example, if you make a typical worksheet and you have a gap fill, for example, you can give some children the first letters, or you can tell them how many letters. You can make their gaps have the number of words, yeah? If you give them a task in which they have to write, you can give them a bigger word count or a smaller word count. Again, all of this is common sense. But I think the key here is to think about your class always in terms of the whole class, but also in terms of the individuals. And remember that each one is unique. Okay, lesson 4. And anyone who has spent any time with children know that they love repeating things. They love playing the same games. They love you reading the same story again and again. I have a very nice memory from my own life, actually. And when I was a young mother, I had one child who was 2.5, and I was going into hospital to have my second child. And my mum came to stay with me to look after me a little bit at that time, look after all of us. And while I was in hospital, she was at home with my daughter. And it turned out that my daughter pushed the boundaries a little bit, and she asked my mum to read her a story. So she read her a story, and then she said again, and she read the story again, and then she repeated that. And my mum reckoned that she read the same story about 30 times before my daughter actually went to sleep that night. So I'm not suggesting that you do the same thing, but what I would say is that in a classroom, we can play the same games again and again, just changing things a little bit. So when I started teaching, when I was a new teacher, I used to think that repetition was a bad thing. I used to think that I had to always be doing something new. I used to think that if I played the same game 2 days on the run, then that was kind of not good because they'd already done it. And then over time, obviously, I realized that no, it's a good thing, especially with a game, because we spend so much time giving the instructions to then not, use it and reuse it is a bit mad, yeah. So also we can reuse materials that we've already used in new ways. So for example, if you are using a course book with your learners, and you have 5 minutes and you're wondering what to do with those 5 minutes, maybe it's coming up to lunchtime or something, you can go back to previously taught material and reuse something that you've used before. And I think this is something that we never do, but why not? Because there are a few good reasons for doing this. Firstly, the children have already seen the material, so they'll know the language that you taught at that point in the book. So you'll be recycling, which is another key element when we teach primary. So, and also you've got the materials there, they've got it there. And when the materials were created, if they publish materials, they're probably going to be, you'll have good quality photos, images, etc. So for example, one example is to go back to an image or a picture story, and you can play a game like a 2-minute memory game where they just look and then close the books and you ask them some questions. If it's a text, you could maybe play an alphabet game or an alphabet activity where you get them to read through quickly and find a word beginning with B or a word ending in Y, this kind of thing. And with an audio, I would say again, audios are probably the least exploited resource that we use in our classroom, because when you think about it, usually we just use the audio for its primary intention and then that's it, we forget about it. Why not go back to that audio? So you'll have the audio script, and for example, you might find a script, you might read through, you can select maybe 20 words from that script, from the beginning, the middle and the end, put them on the board, ask your learners to choose 9 of those words and to make themselves a bingo grid, and then play the audio and they listen, and when they hear their words, they cross them off the grid. So you're making new resources, new materials from existing resources. So lesson number 5, seeing yourself in materials is motivating. Okay, this is something that's coming up again and again, isn't it? The importance of students seeing their own lives reflected in the materials that they use in classroom. And I know that Silvana Accardo is giving a talk at 4 o'clock UTC time on this topic, on inclusion. So I'm going to be attending that, and I hope to see some of you there. But one of the main differences, I think, between, well, when we teach primary, we rely very heavily on images. And very often the images that we are using show lives that are not particularly connected with the lives of our children. But when we make our own materials, it's a perfect opportunity for us to do this. So we can find pictures and we can use the pictures that we choose to teach the language that we're teaching, but showing our learners, look, you know, we don't even have to say it, do we? These children look like you. And I'm not just talking about ethnic groups, I'm talking about things like if somebody wears glasses, you might have some children in the class, or if they're pictures, if you're teaching things like objects in the house, maybe you could find pictures of houses that are familiar to your learners. Okay, this is something I feel quite strongly, and Marina's made a good comment there in the chat as well. So this is a picture that I just slipped in last minute when I was preparing my slides there, because this is my friend Gaia. I don't know if Gaia is here today, but she's a colleague and teacher, and I actually asked her for a photograph of herself when she was about 12 or 13 to send to the illustrator who was illustrating one of my books. This is Oxford Rooftops. And I said, I want my character to look like this. And they made her look like that. And it was such a joy. And it was just great to have somebody with those features in that book for many, many reasons. So that was a win situation for me in one of my battles. Lesson number 5. Lesson number 6, sorry. So children love being involved, and we know this. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Well, why don't we get the children to help us make materials for the lessons? Because it's extremely motivating. And when we need, for example, we want some flashcards of clothes, why not ask the children themselves to make those flashcards? They can cut up pages from publicity leaflets and make them that way. They can draw things, they can write the words to have the word flashcards, they could make posters, whatever. There are many things that children can do to help and to be involved. You can get them to bring in photos too, photos of things around the house, for example, whatever. So I think that learner-generated materials in general are very motivating, and you can make the classroom more theirs, if you like, if they see their own products being used as materials for teaching, for learning. Okay, just checking the time here. Okay, so lesson number 7, thinking. So always building a thinking stage to any materials, anything that you're doing really with the children in the classroom. So thinking time is crucial. All too often we give out the materials, or we say open the book, or we do whatever, and we expect the learners to just jump in and start doing a task. Now, I know from my own experience as a teacher that I used to do this, and part of the reason is because I used to think, ironically, that thinking time was time that wasn't really being useful, because nothing was really happening if they were just sitting there thinking. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And one thing I think is useful to do as a teacher, especially a new teacher, is to either remember your own experiences as a learner, or actually, if that's in the distant past for some people, become a learner again and do a course on anything. Yeah, there are loads of free online courses. And when you are put into the position of a learner, suddenly you realize things like this, that you need some thinking time before jumping in to do a task. So if you make a worksheet, for example, and you're going to practice, for example, parts of the body, okay, you could actually build in a stage, or this can be part of the worksheet, or you can give the instruction to say, think about the parts of your body, and get them to just sit there thinking from the top to their toes what the parts of the body are. And this is also an opportunity for them to ask questions, okay? Because unless it's an exam situation, and hopefully it won't be, then it's good to get them to ask questions. So if they suddenly remember, or they suddenly think, what's that part of my body called? I've forgotten, so they can ask. And that thinking stage will produce dialogue sometimes, and then they can do the task and they'll be more prepared. The next slide is going to look quite similar to this slide. So I'm just going to ask you, just for a bit of fun in the chat box, what's the difference between this slide and this slide? Just write in the chat box. And yeah, this is a follow on really, and it's something that I think is extremely important when we teach our primary children, and in fact in any kind of learning. Always building a reflection stage. So again, in the same way as when I was a new teacher, I used to think that thinking time before a task was maybe not that useful. I never used to give reflection tasks or reflection time after a task. It just wasn't something I thought about. My children in my first teaching job, they were 4 and 5, and I was a new teacher, and I'd had very little training, and to get through the day and to get through everything I had to do, it was kind of a there were this many things to do, and it was just jumping from this one to the next one, and then it was break time, and then this time, and I didn't used to stop after tasks and encourage the learners to reflect on what they've done, and also use that time to reflect myself on how that had just gone. Okay, this needs to be guided, and it needs to be age appropriate. And it might be something very, very simple, like, you might decide, to ask them if they enjoyed doing that task, or if they found it easy to stand on that side of the classroom, if they found it challenging to stand on that side, or somewhere along the, in the middle. There are any number of things that you can do to just guide some kind of reflection there. And while we're talking about reflection, I think an important message to teachers is to reflect on your practice as a whole. I think 5 minutes, even 5 minutes at the end of each day, to make a note of maybe a lesson learned from your learners, which is what we're talking about today. Make a note of that. So at the end of the year, you've got all this wonderfully useful information, which can then go on to inform your practice as you become more experienced. Okay, so lesson number 9, building a practice stage. This is especially important, I think, when you are asking your learners to do a speaking activity. But we can have practice for any activity. But when we're asking them to speak, I think there should be a very clear instruction that you give the students to say, okay, have 5 minutes to practice and ask questions, and it doesn't matter if you make mistakes, etc. and then do the speaking task. Because it's only when the children start speaking that they realize they might need help with something. Maybe they've forgotten a word, maybe they don't know how to pronounce a word. While they're practicing, of course, you can be monitoring and you can be helping and you can be saying, just encouraging and saying, yeah, that's fantastic, or you need, or just repeating words so that they know how to say them, etc. I know that when primary age children, and I know this because I've done it myself many times, if you give primary age children homework that involves making an audio, so you say, okay, maybe for young children, you can say, record yourself saying 5 words of objects in your kitchen. Okay, very basic. And they go and they do the recording and they can send you an audio file. There are a number of ways of doing this. Some of you might be familiar with Vockaroo, and I'm going to write that in the chat box. It's a website, it's a free website with a recording function. But what happens is, the beautiful thing about this is that parents later speak to you and they say, oh my goodness, that was wonderful. My little boy, he recorded himself saying those 5 words, but he actually said them 100 times because he was recording and deleting and re-recording because he wanted to get them perfect and he was practicing. So give them that opportunity in the classroom too. Okay, this is lesson number, just checking. Okay, so I'm getting near the end here. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes just to make sure I've got the number here. Lesson number 10, white space. Okay, so this is talking about, here I'm talking about when you make a worksheet for your students, okay? And white space is everything in design. And what I mean by this is that don't try to cram too much onto a worksheet. Leave space. Make sure that everything is clear. Have less rather than more. Don't have things too crowded. Think a little bit about the design of what you're making. Imagine you are a designer for once. It's a great creative opportunity. Think about how you're going to use the space, how you're going to use borders, and how you're going to make it user-friendly. And while you're learning how to do this better and better, show people and ask them and say, what do you think of this? Do you think this is any good? Or do you think I need to add more space or make things a little bit clearer somehow? Don't just throw everything on the worksheet. This is a mistake that I made at the beginning, where I tried to get as much on a worksheet as possible. And I'm going to end with a bonus lesson, okay? So this picture here is of a little boy, and it reminds me, it's to remind me of an anecdote that I wanted to finish with, okay? So children are unpredictable, and I remember this one particular class where my children we used to play different games, etc. And one day they asked me, one game that we used to play was miming, okay? So I'm sure you've all played games where you put the children into teams maybe, and you give one child a flashcard with a picture, and they have to mime the picture, and then the other children in the class have to guess what the word is. And we had played this game successfully previously, and the last time we played it, the words were things, or the pictures were things like clean your teeth, go to bed. So the miming was very straightforward. And this one day we were going to play a game, and one of the little boys in my class, I can say his name now, Jacobo, because he's probably about 30 today, but at the time he was a young child, and he said he wanted to play this miming game to recycle the vocabulary we'd be learning in class. But we had been learning fruit and vegetables. So I thought for a minute, and I thought, no, that's not going to work. But he was insisting. And I thought, do you know what? Let's do it. And then he will see why I've said no. So we played, and I said, okay. So I said, you can mime first. And I gave Jacobo a flashcard. And on the picture, it was on the flashcard, it was a picture of a peach. And he immediately got down onto the floor. This is a picture of him here on the slide. And he was rolling around with his, like a ball. And I thought it was really funny. And suddenly all of the children started putting up their hands and saying, peach, because they knew he was being a peach. And I learned an important lesson there, which is go with the flow. Children are unpredictable. And that is, of course, the beauty of teaching children. So that is the wonderful thing about teaching children. So I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for all the comments and doing what I've asked you to do in the chat box. That's really, really great. And now I believe we have about 10 minutes or 20 minutes for some questions and answers. I haven't got my clock here, but I'm sure that somebody from the YLTSIG will keep us on track here. I can't see any questions at the moment, so I don't know what I need to do. I've got some here. Sorry. Wow. Okay, so I'm going to start. Let's have a look. How can Zainel Ali Yildiz, and please accept my apologies if I've pronounced your name wrong. How can we reduce the time we spend creating materials, but keep the quality high at the same time? I'm a 4th year ELT student doing a practicum with 8th graders. It takes a lot of time to prepare materials from scratch. Okay, I've got a few answers there. So a few ideas here. So when we create materials, one of the best ways of creating good materials is to find materials that we like and we think are good and we think work, and then copy those. Yeah, I don't mean copy everything exactly, obviously, but take those ideas and use the same ones. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So you can, another good idea, I think, is if you're going to make various worksheets, I'm saying worksheets, I mean, it can be anything really, for various classes, what you can do is design a worksheet that you think works reasonably well and use it as a template to make others, so that you copy the initial worksheet. You can change some things around, but making sure that you've got, you know, that it works, that it's logical, this kind of thing. And use pictures that you've got to hand, and we can spend all the time, can't we, making materials? It's like, you know, you could spend 5 minutes or you could spend 5 days. And obviously, you know, you don't want to be spending too much time if you've got other things to do. So don't, you know, keep it simple. For example, flashcards or a game it should be relatively straightforward. So we've got an anonymous person here. I'm just looking at the question. I was talking about representation. I had a situation where I was using materials from a well-known website where some of the children were drawn with a hearing aid or prosthetic foot, among other things. One of the children, who was 7 at the time, started laughing at the pictures. This surprised me because he wasn't a particularly nasty boy and I didn't expect it. Obviously, it's because he's never been exposed to people who are differently abled. Have you ever been in a situation like this? What advice could you give us on how to handle it? That's a very good question. I have been in situations like this. I think anybody teaching children over any length of time will find themselves sometimes in situations like this. Most of the time, I think what happens in a classroom when things like this happens is, as we are pausing to consider our approach and what we're going to say, the other children are often the ones who jump in and respond in some way. So another child might say, it's not nice to laugh, or, you know, this kind of thing. But we can make that happen as well by asking another child or a question like, what difficulties do you think this child in the picture has every day, or what problems might they face? Or I don't think we should brush it under the carpet. I think if an opportunity comes up in the classroom where we can help our children to discover that there are other people out there who might be different to them, and really it shouldn't be a problem, it should be a learning experience, then it's a good idea to address it. So okay, I'm just going through some of these pictures here. Ahmed Boulinia, again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. How to persuade colleagues, teachers that students are all different and each of them requires a different approach, needs, and quantity of knowledge. Okay, so I would say that if you are working in a context where you feel there is a need to persuade your colleagues that all students are different, then maybe you could find some material to share with your colleagues to read, an article or a blog post or something. But maybe you could offer to give some inset training, and in an informal way. Okay, so we all learn from each other. So if you have a group of teachers and you're working together, either online or offline, or even if you're not working together but you're all online, you've got a fantastic opportunity there to have a kind of sharing information, informal teacher training situation. And you might sort of decide to talk about that, and then let other people get involved too, and point out that maybe ask some questions like, how do you learn best? And then when people start answering that question, it will become apparent that we all learn in different ways and we all need more or less support. Okay, Rashmi Grover, how to help a struggling beginner student participate in reflection process. So, okay, so reflection, I think it has to be age appropriate, and also it has to be level appropriate, yeah? So you would not expect a beginner student to be writing at length in terms of reflection. But what you can do is you can copy some of the methods that we use in published materials. So for example, maybe in their notebooks after each lesson or after each task or after some tasks, you could get them to draw and colour the number of like stars. So if they found something interesting, they give it 3 stars. If they didn't understand something, maybe you could have faces too. So if they found something complicated, they could draw a sad face or a question mark. Drawing, I think, is a fantastic way of engaging students of lower levels. So you're not asking them to write anything, You're not asking them to say anything, but you're asking them to draw something or colour something. And that's usually something that they can all do. So that and then they get used to it. If it becomes a routine, they'll get used to it. You can also use cards maybe, so that every child has a set of cards which mean different things. So maybe a yellow card means I'm really happy, I love this activity, and this kind of thing. It all comes down to context in the end. Sami Boshra says, can we set a competition of creating materials among students? And that's a great idea. I think that student-generated materials are just so motivating. It doesn't even have to be a competition. You could decide maybe at the beginning of the year or halfway through the year or whenever, okay, the classroom would benefit from 4 posters to help children revise and recycle language for clothes, food, etc. And then you could just give them that task. They could build it up over time. They could add words to a poster, pictures. But a competition is a lovely idea too. Do you explain pronunciation? At what age? Ask them to write pronunciation in the sheet. Jana Novakova. That's a really good question too. So these days, people have different methods when it comes to pronunciation. I think in my experience with a primary class, the most important thing when it comes to pronunciation is that your class, your learners, are provided with an excellent model of any language that you want them to produce. Okay, so hopefully as a teacher you can provide that model, but I know that sometimes it isn't possible, or teachers might not feel confident, and that's where we can use audio or video resources. Also, I would say to teachers, especially to new teachers, that one really useful thing that you can do before going into a class as part of your lesson planning, if you like, if you're going to teach a set of new vocabulary, for example, imagine you've got 10 words for animals that you're going to teach. There are lots of online dictionaries these days where you write in the word and you can listen to the word. Okay, you can listen to the way it's pronounced, and you at home or in the staff room or wherever you are can actually do what you're going to ask the children to do. Yeah, you can listen and repeat, and that's a fantastic way of improving your own English as well. And it's never, that's a great thing to do. I do it myself. If I come across a word sometimes that I think, how is that pronounced? Or I might disagree with a friend or colleague about how it's pronounced. And then I look it up and I listen and I think, oh, wow, I was wrong. Yeah. And this happens to everybody. We can't all be expected to know everything. Mayalen Yurita Montesinos. My main concern in these cases is good monitoring. Sometimes we tend to correct students and interrupt activities. How can we manage a good monitoring to correct them, promoting good development of activities instead of interrupting? I think getting the balance is it's never easy, is it? And I think when it comes to monitoring, how I became good at monitoring myself as a teacher was by being observed by a more experienced teacher, or even a peer, another teacher who was inexperienced, and asking them to focus on my monitoring skills. So actually going into a class with a colleague and saying, okay, watch me teach for 15 minutes or whatever, and please make a note of anything that comes to mind in terms of the way I monitor. Don't worry about anything else, just focus on monitoring. And then afterwards, have a chat with that person who observed you, and you will learn lots, because we all do things that we are unaware of. And I remember when I was observed, I had remarks about my monitoring, and I used to interrupt people, or sometimes you might have a tendency to over monitor certain groups and not pay enough attention to other groups. So I think observation is something that we should embrace as teachers, and not run away from and not be afraid of. And we can learn so much just from asking somebody to come into the class and watch us, and not watch everything, but just focus on one particular area. Patricia Salguero. Hi, Patricia. I have a girl of 5 years old who's my student. I teach her online. Oh gosh, she doesn't concentrate. I try different things. We do a lot of exercises, and I teach her an hour a day. It's very difficult to catch her attention. Oh my goodness. I take this as an opportunity for any teacher out there today who is currently teaching on the online. Can you please write in the chat box if you are currently teaching online? Just write yes if you are. And I would say to you, thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing such an amazing job. And you're all doing an amazing job, no matter how many times it doesn't work out as you intend it to. You're doing an amazing job because you're jumping in there and actually doing it. So coming back to Patricia, teaching one-to-one for 1 hour every day a child who is 5 years old, that to me is just, it seems crazy. I wouldn't know where to start if I were you. I suppose what I would try to do, if it was possible, speaking to that child's parents, would be to have some real breaks. So maybe split it up into 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, and actually have a real break of 5 minutes where you go away and have a coffee or whatever, and the child gets away, goes out to another room or whatever, and then comes back. But I don't be hard on yourself, because you've taken on a real task there. So as well, please don't be hard on yourself, and maybe get together with other colleagues who are teaching one-to-one young children online and get tips for them. An hour, it seems a long time to me. Okay, I'm going to move on. This is a good one. How to be a reflective teacher. Do you have any suggestions? I'm going to try to say your name. Akmar-san, I hope. Yeah, I've got loads of suggestions how to be a reflective teacher. You can do it. I think even asking about how to be a reflective teacher shows that you're already a reflective teacher. So I think we can do it in small ways or bigger ways. And if we think small, then we probably will actually do what we set out to do. So maybe you could have a reflective journal that you write in every day for, 5 minutes. If you prefer to do things in different ways, maybe you could make recordings of yourself, saying, key things that you thought about a lesson. Always, I would say one observation I would say is when you do self-reflection and you're thinking about what you've done in a lesson, always consider the things that you've done well. Don't only focus on the things that you don't think went very well or the things that you could do better. We have a tendency sometimes to just think about what went wrong. That's good, obviously, that's important, but it's equally, if not more important, to think about what went well so that we can do it again and so that we can feel some kind of positive reaction to what we've been doing. So at what age would you start to focus on teamwork? I found it tricky at age 4, a lot easier at age 5. Carmen, Valerio. I think, excuse me, the younger the child, the more the smaller their world is. And we know this as primary teachers. So it gets easier and easier as the children get older. But I think that it depends on, for example, if you do have a class of 4-year-olds and you want to do some kind of teamwork or group work, give it a go, but maybe don't plan anything too big. So maybe plan a 5-minute activity rather than a 20-minute activity. And if it doesn't work, doesn't matter. Think about it. Why didn't it work? And then, try something different next time. I'm going down to Anne Selma Saha. Did you find that male and female children had different love being involved in the classroom? In my personal experience of teaching primary children, it was in Spain mainly, and I found no differences between male and female children, but that's probably because I didn't look for differences, and maybe in their background, their cultural background, there were no differences. Maybe in some countries where boys and girls are treated differently, those differences will be brought into the classroom. So I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. Marina's saying that boys are more self-confident in Croatia. That could be true. I would imagine that in most countries where there is a difference, boys will be more self-confident rather than girls. So as a teacher, maybe it's our job to show those girls that they have every right to their opinions. They have every right to speak up, and the classroom should be a place where there is 100% equality between every single person in the room. I actually think that's probably a really good place to end, because I think that in a classroom, there needs to be democracy. And for me, that is probably the most important aspect of teaching, that we create a situation where every single child is important and recognized and equal. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Katherine, for your opening plenary. So much food for thought.